The most dangerous mistake is believing you already know someone's story before they have spoken a single word. The morning air carried the quiet dignity that always surrounded the annual Veterans Memorial Ceremony in Arlington, Virginia. American flags lined the sidewalks, folding chairs stretched across the memorial plaza, and families gathered beneath a clear blue sky, while military bands rehearsed in the distance. Volunteers arranged wreaths beside polished granite monuments. Reporters prepared live broadcasts, and local police officers worked with event organizers to guide the growing crowd through security checkpoints before the ceremony officially began. Among the visitors was Colonel James Carter, a retired Army veteran whose charcoal sport coat displayed several military decorations above his heart. He walked with an unhurried confidence, carrying nothing more than a worn leather folder and the quiet posture of someone who had long ago learned that real service rarely demanded recognition. Most people passed him without a second glance. Some smiled politely. Others assumed he was simply another veteran attending the ceremony to honor old friends whose names were forever carved into stone. Officer Nathan Collins noticed him almost immediately. After several recent reports involving individuals wearing military decorations they had not earned, Nathan had been instructed to remain attentive throughout the event. As James approached the temporary security area, Nathan's attention focused on the medals displayed across the older man's jacket. They appeared authentic, yet Nathan believed appearances alone should never settle important questions. He stepped forward with calm professionalism and raised one hand. "Sir, may I speak with you for a moment?" James stopped immediately and offered a courteous smile. "Of course, officer. How may I help you?" Nathan studied the medals carefully before speaking again. "Those decorations represent extraordinary service. I need to verify a few things before you continue." James nodded without hesitation. "I understand completely." Several nearby visitors slowed their pace, curious but not alarmed. A local television crew continued gathering background footage for the ceremony, their cameras quietly capturing the entrance area without focusing on any one individual. Volunteers carried folding chairs across the plaza while children holding small American flags waited beside their grandparents. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary except for the growing silence surrounding the conversation. Nathan asked whether James possessed documentation identifying his military service. James answered calmly, "My identification is inside the folder I am carrying. I will retrieve it only if you would like me to." Nathan considered the request before replying. "Please wait just a moment." James lowered his hands naturally and remained exactly where he had been asked to stand. There was no frustration in his expression and no attempt to argue. He simply waited with remarkable patience, watching the morning sunlight reflect across the memorial as though time itself had slowed. Nathan glanced once more at the decorations before saying quietly, "I have seen people wear medals they did not earn. I hope that is not happening today." James met his eyes with steady composure. "Hope is always a better place to begin than certainty." The words lingered between them. Nathan requested a routine records check through dispatch while continuing the conversation. Nearby, one visitor casually lifted a phone to record the beautiful memorial setting, unintentionally including the interaction in the background. A television camera remained pointed toward the ceremony entrance as reporters prepared their opening broadcast. Event security cameras quietly documented every movement from above, preserving each moment without opinion or emotion. James never mentioned his military career, never referred to past achievements, and never suggested that anyone should recognize his name. He believed respect earned through character lasted longer than respect demanded through reputation. Nathan, convinced he was simply following responsible procedure, waited for additional information before allowing anyone to proceed. Neither man realized that only a few miles away, officials coordinating a special White House recognition ceremony had already begun asking the same question. Where was Colonel James Carter? As the crowd continued gathering beneath rows of American flags, no one standing in that memorial plaza understood that the person quietly waiting at the security checkpoint was the very individual the White House had been trying to reach by name all morning. 45 minutes earlier, the memorial grounds had been almost completely empty except for volunteers unfolding rows of chairs beneath towering oak trees and maintenance crews carefully placing fresh wreaths beside polished granite monuments. Colonel James Carter had arrived before sunrise in an aging pickup truck that still carried the faint dust of countless road trips to veterans' hospitals, military reunions, and community service events across the country. He parked several blocks away instead of using the reserved spaces set aside for honored guests. It had become a lifelong habit. Recognition had never been the reason he showed up. Service was. Carrying only a weathered leather folder beneath one arm, James crossed the quiet streets toward the Memorial Plaza, greeting sanitation workers, groundskeepers, and early volunteers with the same warm smile. Along the way, he noticed an elderly veteran struggling to unload several folding display boards from the back of a station wagon. Without hesitation, James set down his own folder, lifted the heavier panels with practiced ease, and helped arrange them near the entrance to the ceremony. The older veteran thanked him sincerely. James simply answered, "We all carried someone else's weight at some point. Today is no different." Neither man mentioned military rank. Neither spoke about medals. They simply finished the task together before shaking hands. Nearby, a young volunteer watched the exchange and quietly assumed James was another retired service member willing to lend a hand. She never imagined the modest gentleman standing beside her had once advised senior military leaders during overseas operations, or that his name appeared on today's confidential guest list for a special recognition event. As James continued toward the memorial, he paused beside a small group of children placing miniature American flags into the soft grass surrounding a monument dedicated to fallen service members. One little boy accidentally dropped an entire bundle of flags across the sidewalk. James immediately knelt to help gather them one by one, carefully brushing away the dust before handing each flag back with quiet respect. "Every flag represents someone who believed tomorrow was worth protecting," he told the child gently. The boy smiled and thanked him before running back to his family. James never mentioned that he had once stood at ceremonies much larger than this one. He believed the meaning behind remembrance mattered far more than the audience watching it. Across town, inside a secure federal office, preparations were also underway. Members of a White House military protocol team reviewed the morning schedule while confirming the arrival of several distinguished guests expected later that day. One name received particular attention: Colonel James Carter. His attendance had been personally requested because of decades of distinguished public service after retiring from active duty. When an assistant noticed that his arrival had not yet been confirmed, a quiet phone call was placed to the event coordinator at the memorial. The coordinator assumed James had already entered through public security and promised to verify his arrival shortly. Meanwhile, James reached the outer security area carrying himself with the same calm dignity that had defined every step of his morning. He never expected special treatment and never intended to announce who he was before anyone asked. To him, every visitor deserved the same courtesy regardless of reputation or accomplishment. At that same moment, Officer Nathan Collins began scanning the steady flow of guests approaching the entrance. Recent briefings about fraudulent military decorations remained fresh in his mind, encouraging heightened awareness throughout the event. Nathan believed careful observation protected both veterans and the integrity of the ceremony itself. When his eyes settled on the rows of military decorations displayed across James's jacket, professional curiosity gradually turned into determined scrutiny. Neither man realized their paths were about to intersect in a way that would quietly transform an ordinary morning into a lesson remembered long after the final wreath had been placed and the last notes of the military band faded into the afternoon sky. The quiet conversation at the security entrance gradually drew the attention of people passing nearby, not because anyone raised a voice, but because long pauses often invited more curiosity than loud arguments. Officer Nathan Collins remained focused on the medals displayed across Colonel James Carter's jacket, while the dispatcher continued processing the routine verification request. James stood patiently with relaxed shoulders, keeping both hands visible and making no effort to hurry the process. Years of military service had taught him that calm cooperation often carried greater strength than unnecessary words. A young couple walking toward the ceremony slowed for a moment before continuing on, assuming the officer was simply performing a standard security check. A local television camera remained positioned near the entrance, capturing wide shots of families arriving beneath rows of American flags as producers prepared for the morning broadcast. Event volunteers continued greeting guests without realizing that one of the ceremony's most important attendees was still waiting outside the checkpoint. Nathan looked at James once more before asking, "How long were you in the army?" James answered without hesitation, "Long enough to appreciate every peaceful morning like this one." Nathan nodded but continued carefully, "Can you be more specific?" James smiled politely. "Several decades, officer." The answer sounded truthful, yet it revealed almost nothing. Nathan believed complete verification remained necessary before allowing the visitor to proceed. He asked another question. "Were those medals presented during active duty?" James replied, "Every decoration I wear represents the efforts of many people, not only my own." The response again avoided boasting while offering no details that could easily confirm his record. Nathan quietly interpreted the humility as possible hesitation, while James simply believed personal achievements deserved restraint. Nearby, a volunteer coordinator checked her clipboard for the arrival of honored guests. She paused after noticing one name had still not been marked present: Colonel James Carter. Assuming traffic had delayed him, she made a quick phone call to another coordinator inside the memorial grounds. Neither realized he was standing less than 100 feet away. Across the plaza, the military band completed another rehearsal as veterans wearing service caps exchanged stories from different generations. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders to watch the growing crowd. The ceremony continued moving toward its scheduled beginning, but behind the scenes, organizers were quietly becoming concerned. At nearly the same moment, inside a secure federal communications office, a White House military aide reviewed the attendance report once again. The confirmation beside Colonel Carter's name remained blank. Another call was placed to the event coordinator with a simple request: "Please locate Colonel James Carter immediately. His transportation schedule depends upon your confirmation." The message was delivered with professional urgency, but without alarm. Back at the security entrance, Nathan received a brief update through his radio. The records search was taking longer than expected because several military databases required additional confirmation. Nathan thanked the dispatcher and turned back toward James. "I appreciate your patience." James nodded. "You are doing your job. I respect that." Those words surprised Nathan more than he expected. Many people became frustrated during even routine security checks, yet this man remained remarkably composed. For a brief moment, Nathan wondered whether his first impression had been incomplete, but training reminded him to rely on facts rather than instinct. He continued waiting. A teenage student standing nearby quietly recorded panoramic footage of the memorial for a school media project, unknowingly capturing the peaceful interaction from across the walkway. Overhead, fixed security cameras silently documented every passing minute with impartial precision. James glanced toward the rows of memorial stones where families continued arriving to honor loved ones who never returned home. His expression carried neither impatience nor embarrassment, only quiet reflection. He knew ceremonies like this were never about individual recognition. They were about remembering sacrifice shared across generations. Just then, another phone inside the event office began ringing. The coordinator answered and listened carefully before her expression changed. The caller from the White House spoke only one sentence that immediately transformed an ordinary scheduling concern into something far more significant. "We need to know exactly where Colonel James Carter is because the president's staff is waiting for him." Without another word, the coordinator hurried toward the entrance, unaware that every answer she needed was already standing calmly behind the security line, waiting with the same patience that had guided him through a lifetime of service. The event coordinator moved quickly across the memorial plaza while keeping one hand on her phone, carefully weaving between families carrying small American flags and volunteers making final preparations before the ceremony. Her name was Sarah Miller, and after coordinating veterans events for nearly 15 years, she had learned that unexpected changes often happened during the final minutes before everything officially began. Even so, she had never received a call from the White House asking for the exact location of an honored guest with such quiet urgency. She checked the printed guest list once more. Colonel James Carter remained the only distinguished participant whose arrival had not been confirmed. She contacted another volunteer stationed near the registration table. "Has Colonel Carter checked in yet?" The answer came back immediately. "No, not yet." Sarah thanked the volunteer and continued walking toward the security entrance, hoping she would find him before another call arrived. At the checkpoint, Officer Nathan Collins remained patient but attentive as the record's inquiry continued through official channels. He had not raised his voice, nor had he treated James with disrespect. Yet he remained convinced that verifying military decorations before allowing unrestricted access to a public event honored veterans who had earned their recognition honestly. James understood the purpose behind the questions, even if the delay had begun attracting quiet attention. A retired Marine standing several yards away observed the conversation without interrupting, while another veteran remarked softly to a friend that the older gentleman waiting near the entrance carried himself with remarkable composure. James simply smiled at a young child who waved an American flag in his direction before returning his attention to Nathan. "Officer," James said calmly, "I appreciate that you are following procedure. I only hope the ceremony begins on time for the families who came to remember their loved ones." Nathan answered honestly, "I hope so too, sir. This should not take much longer." At that very moment, the dispatch radio crackled with another update. The verification remained incomplete because archived military service records required additional coordination. Nathan acknowledged the message and thanked dispatch before slipping the radio back onto his shoulder. He noticed that James showed no visible frustration. Instead, the retired colonel quietly looked toward the memorial where volunteers carefully adjusted rows of white chairs beneath the morning sun. The peaceful atmosphere contrasted sharply with the growing sense that something important was unfolding just beyond everyone's understanding. Sarah finally reached the outer security area and immediately recognized the medals displayed on James's jacket from the official program photographs she had reviewed the previous evening. Before she could say anything, her phone rang again. She answered quickly. The voice on the other end belonged to White House military aide Thomas Mitchell. "Ms. Miller, we still have not received confirmation that Colonel James Carter has entered the ceremony grounds. Transportation timing is becoming critical." Sarah looked directly at James, then back toward Nathan. "I believe I have located him," she replied carefully. Thomas answered without hesitation. "Please remain with him. Representatives are already on their way." Sarah lowered the phone slowly, taking a quiet breath before approaching the security area with measured professionalism. She did not interrupt the officer immediately because she respected the responsibilities of local law enforcement, but she also understood that every passing minute affected a carefully coordinated federal schedule. Nathan noticed her approaching and greeted her politely. "Good morning. Can I help you?" Sarah glanced once toward James before answering. "Officer, I believe this gentleman may be one of our honored guests." Nathan nodded respectfully. "We are completing a routine verification. It should be finished shortly." James remained silent, allowing both professionals to perform their respective duties without interference. The surrounding crowd continued growing as reporters adjusted microphones, photographers searched for the best camera angles, and families filled the remaining seats across the memorial plaza. None of them realized that multiple government officials were already traveling toward the ceremony for one purpose alone. They had not come to inspect the event. They had come to escort one quiet retired colonel whose greatest habit throughout his life had been allowing his actions to speak long before his name ever did. The atmosphere around the memorial entrance remained calm on the surface, yet beneath the orderly rhythm of the ceremony preparations, an invisible countdown had quietly begun. Sarah Miller stood only a few feet away, resisting every instinct to interrupt Officer Nathan Collins because she understood that every professional present carried responsibilities that deserved respect. Still, the message she had received echoed in her mind with increasing urgency. Representatives from the White House were already on their way, and every minute mattered. Nathan checked his radio once again before looking toward James Carter. "Sir, thank you for your continued patience. I know this has taken longer than either of us expected." James answered with the same steady expression that had never changed since the conversation began. "Patience is easier when everyone is trying to do the right thing." Those words settled over the small group with quiet weight. Nearby, more families entered the memorial grounds carrying flowers, photographs, and folded programs for the ceremony. Veterans wearing service caps greeted one another with handshakes and warm smiles, while a military band tuned its instruments beneath a white canopy. Television crews adjusted camera angles to capture the growing crowd, and photographers moved carefully through the entrance looking for images that reflected the spirit of remembrance. None of them realized that the most significant story of the morning was unfolding only a short distance away without raised voices, dramatic gestures, or public attention. Across town, inside a secure federal motor pool, two dark government vehicles departed on schedule after receiving final travel authorization. White House military aide Thomas Mitchell sat in the lead vehicle reviewing the official ceremony itinerary. Beside Colonel James Carter's name appeared a handwritten note that simply read, "Personal escort requested." Thomas had worked with distinguished military leaders throughout his career, yet he rarely saw that notation attached to a retired officer. It reflected years of extraordinary service that extended far beyond active duty, including mentorship programs for wounded veterans, military family initiatives, and countless hours spent helping young service members transition into civilian life. None of those accomplishments had ever appeared in newspaper headlines because James had consistently declined interviews and public recognition. Back at the memorial, another message finally arrived through Nathan's radio. Dispatch explained that archived military records were continuing to verify information through official channels and requested additional time. Nathan acknowledged the update before quietly apologizing once more for the delay. James simply nodded. Some things are worth confirming carefully. Sarah's phone rang again almost immediately. She stepped a few feet away before answering. Thomas Mitchell spoke with calm professionalism. "Our vehicles are less than 5 minutes away. Has Colonel Carter been informed?" Sarah glanced toward James before answering truthfully. "No. He has remained completely cooperative and has not identified himself." A brief silence followed before Thomas replied, "That sounds exactly like him." Sarah ended the call with a growing sense of admiration for the man standing patiently beside the security checkpoint. She realized that throughout the entire morning James had never once mentioned his accomplishments, never requested special treatment, and never attempted to speed the process by revealing why he had been invited. He had allowed procedure to unfold naturally because he believed respect for institutions mattered as much as respect for individuals. Nathan noticed Sarah's thoughtful expression, but remained focused on completing the verification properly. He believed the integrity of the ceremony depended upon consistent standards applied equally to every guest, regardless of appearance or circumstance. The distant sound of approaching vehicle engines gradually blended with the music drifting across the memorial grounds. Several event staff members instinctively turned toward the entrance road after noticing the small government motorcade approaching under police traffic assistance. Reporters looked up from their equipment, assuming another public official had arrived for the ceremony. Volunteers paused only briefly before continuing their work. James quietly watched the vehicle's approach without changing his expression, while Nathan followed everyone's gaze with mild curiosity. No one standing at the entrance fully understood why the arriving officials appeared to be looking in only one direction, because from the moment the lead vehicle came to a smooth stop, every member of the federal escort team fixed their attention on the quiet retired colonel who had spent the entire morning waiting with humility, patience, and complete confidence that the truth never needed to arrive in a hurry. The two government vehicles came to a quiet stop near the memorial entrance, drawing respectful attention without disrupting the peaceful atmosphere of the ceremony. Their arrival carried no flashing spectacle and no unnecessary display, only the unmistakable precision of a carefully coordinated federal schedule. Thomas Mitchell stepped out first, accompanied by two members of the official escort team. He adjusted his jacket, glanced once at the printed itinerary in his hand, and immediately began scanning the entrance with practiced confidence. The moment his eyes found Colonel James Carter, his expression softened into one of unmistakable recognition. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward the security checkpoint, passing reporters, volunteers, and event staff who instinctively stepped aside, without understanding why the visitors appeared so focused on one quiet retired veteran. Officer Nathan Collins noticed the approaching delegation and instinctively straightened his posture. Before he could ask how he might assist them, Thomas extended his hand toward James with genuine respect. "Good morning, Colonel Carter. I sincerely apologize for the delay. The White House has been waiting for your arrival." For a brief moment, the sounds of the memorial seemed to fade into the background. Conversation slowed. Reporters lowered their microphones. Volunteers exchanged puzzled glances. Nathan looked from Thomas to James, trying to reconcile the calm man who had patiently answered every question with the distinguished guest now being greeted by name. James accepted the handshake warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell. There is no need for an apology. Everyone here has been doing the work entrusted to them." Thomas smiled. "That answer is exactly what I expected from you, sir." Sarah Miller quietly released the anxious breath she had been holding for the past several minutes. The uncertainty surrounding the missing guest had disappeared instantly, replaced by complete clarity. Nathan remained composed, although the significance of the moment was becoming impossible to ignore. Thomas turned respectfully toward him before speaking. "Officer, thank you for ensuring the security of today's event. Colonel Carter is scheduled to continue with an official White House recognition immediately following this ceremony. We appreciate your diligence." Nathan nodded professionally. "Thank you for confirming his identity." At that same instant, the dispatcher transmitted another update through Nathan's radio. The delayed verification had finally been completed. Every record matched perfectly. Distinguished military career, multiple official commendations, honorable retirement. Nathan listened quietly before acknowledging the message with a simple copy. "Thank you." He lowered the radio slowly and looked back toward James. Nothing about the retired colonel had changed. He still stood with the same calm posture, the same gentle expression, and the same quiet patience he had shown from the very beginning. The only thing that had changed was everyone else's understanding of who he truly was. Several nearby veterans recognized James's name after hearing Thomas address him and exchanged surprised looks with one another. One elderly veteran removed his service cap for a brief moment out of sincere respect before placing it back on his head. A young volunteer whispered softly to another, "He never told anyone." The reply came just as quietly. Maybe he never thought he needed to. Television cameras that had originally been gathering ordinary footage of families arriving at the memorial naturally shifted toward the unexpected meeting unfolding near the entrance. Yet James showed no interest in the attention. Instead, he turned toward Nathan with a calm smile that carried neither pride nor resentment. "Officer Collins," he said gently, "thank you for treating your responsibility seriously. Public trust depends upon people who care enough to verify before they assume." Nathan accepted the words with visible humility. "Colonel Carter, I appreciate your patience throughout the process. I understand much more now than I did when we first met this morning." James gave a slight nod. Understanding often arrives one step behind first impressions. What matters is whether we welcome it when it comes. Thomas then glanced toward the memorial stage where organizers were preparing to begin the ceremony. "Colonel, everyone is ready whenever you are." James looked once across the rows of waiting families, the American flags moving gently in the morning breeze, and the memorial honoring those who had served before him. "Then let us make certain today remains about them," he replied quietly before walking forward, leaving behind not a lesson about status or recognition, but a far greater reminder that genuine honor rarely announces itself, because true character is revealed most clearly in the moments when no one believes they are watching. The memorial ceremony began with the quiet dignity that James Carter had hoped would remain the center of everyone's attention. A military honor guard advanced across the plaza with measured precision while families rose together in respectful silence. The morning breeze carried the sound of the national anthem through rows of American flags, and for several moments every conversation disappeared beneath a shared sense of gratitude. James stood alongside other distinguished guests without requesting a place of special prominence, acknowledging fellow veterans with modest smiles rather than formal introductions. Thomas Mitchell remained nearby, carefully coordinating the schedule for the White House delegation, while Sarah Miller finally allowed herself to enjoy the ceremony after a morning filled with unexpected uncertainty. Officer Nathan Collins continued his assigned duties at the entrance, yet his thoughts repeatedly returned to the quiet retired colonel whose patience had transformed what could have become an uncomfortable misunderstanding into an unexpected lesson in humility. During the opening remarks, the Master of Ceremonies welcomed community leaders, military families, volunteers, and veterans representing multiple generations of service. When it came time to recognize Colonel James Carter, the introduction remained surprisingly brief. Instead of listing every commendation or assignment from his distinguished career, The speaker simply thanked him for a lifetime devoted to serving both the nation and fellow veterans after retirement. James accepted the recognition with a respectful nod before returning the applause toward every veteran seated around him. The audience responded warmly, sensing that the man standing before them valued collective sacrifice far more than individual praise. Following the ceremony, members of the White House delegation escorted James to a nearby reception area where several military families had gathered. Rather than discussing his own accomplishments, James spent nearly an hour speaking with young service members preparing for deployment, parents whose children had recently enlisted, and veterans adjusting to civilian life. He listened far more than he spoke. One young Army sergeant admitted feeling uncertain about balancing military responsibilities with raising a family. James answered with gentle honesty. Success is measured less by the titles you earn than by the people who know they can depend on you when life becomes difficult. Nearby, Thomas Mitchell watched the conversations unfold and quietly remarked to Sarah, "This is exactly why the White House wanted him here. His greatest contribution has never been what he achieved for himself. It has always been what he helps others become." Sarah smiled in agreement. "I understand that now." Meanwhile, Officer Nathan Collins completed his responsibilities before requesting permission to briefly leave his post. He walked toward the reception area carrying himself with the same professionalism that had guided him throughout the morning, although his purpose was now personal rather than procedural. When James noticed him approaching, he excused himself from the conversation he was having and greeted Nathan with the same welcoming expression he had shown from the beginning. Nathan spoke sincerely. "Colonel Carter, I wanted to thank you for the grace you showed today. Looking back, I realize how easily assumptions can grow when information is incomplete." James considered the words before answering. "Officer Collins, every profession requires difficult decisions. What defines character is the willingness to keep learning after those decisions have been made." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "I will remember that." James smiled. "Then today has already accomplished more than either of us expected." Their conversation lasted only a few minutes. Yet several nearby veterans quietly observed the exchange with genuine appreciation. They recognized that neither man was trying to prove himself right. Instead, both were demonstrating something far more valuable, respect strengthened by honest reflection. As the reception concluded, Thomas informed James that it was time to depart for the White House. The federal escort prepared the vehicles while reporters respectfully maintained their distance, understanding that the morning had never been about creating headlines. It had become a reminder that dignity often speaks most clearly through quiet actions, that patience can reveal truths impossible to discover through haste, and that genuine honor is not measured by how quickly people recognize your name, but by the lasting difference your character leaves in the lives of everyone fortunate enough to meet you. Later that afternoon, the White House recognition concluded with the same quiet dignity that had defined the entire day. There were photographs, formal greetings, and words of appreciation. Yet Colonel James Carter left the ceremony exactly as he had arrived at the memorial that morning, carrying only his worn leather folder and thanking every staff member who had helped organize the event. Before departing, he spent several extra minutes speaking with interns, military aides, and members of the support staff, asking about their families and encouraging them to remember that public service was measured not only by important decisions, but also by everyday acts of integrity. Thomas Mitchell watched the conversations with admiration because he had witnessed the same pattern for years. No matter how distinguished the audience became, James always devoted the greatest attention to people whose names rarely appeared in official programs. As the federal vehicles departed, life gradually returned to its normal rhythm across the memorial grounds. Volunteers folded chairs, families gathered photographs beside the monuments, and veterans exchanged one final round of handshakes before traveling home. Officer Nathan Collins remained behind with his supervisor to complete the routine after-action paperwork required after every major public event. Sergeant Kevin Brooks reviewed the morning timeline carefully, including the delayed verification involving Colonel Carter. There had been no complaints, no confrontation, and no violation of departmental procedure. Even so, Kevin noticed something thoughtful in Nathan's expression. "You have been quiet since the ceremony ended," he observed. Nathan nodded. "Today reminded me that every person standing in front of us has a story we cannot see." Kevin closed the report folder and replied, "That is one lesson worth keeping." Over the following week, the department conducted its normal internal review of the event, examining radio communications, security procedures, and coordination with organizers to identify opportunities for improvement. The review concluded that communication between local officials and event coordinators could be strengthened so that distinguished guests could be confirmed more efficiently during future ceremonies without compromising security standards. Nathan participated willingly in every discussion, openly sharing how incomplete information had influenced his initial assessment and how valuable the later confirmation had been. Rather than becoming defensive, he encouraged younger officers attending the training session to ask additional questions before reaching conclusions. "Professional judgment begins with facts," he told them. "But good judgment also requires remembering that facts sometimes arrive in stages." His comments resonated throughout the room because they reflected genuine reflection instead of obligation. Meanwhile, James returned to his regular life with little interest in discussing the attention surrounding the ceremony. He resumed visiting veterans' hospitals, mentoring recently retired service members, and volunteering with community organizations just as he had for years. When friends mentioned the recognition he had received, James gently redirected the conversation toward the sacrifices of military families and the importance of supporting those still serving. For him, the ceremony had never been the destination. It had simply been another opportunity to encourage others through example. Several weeks later, Sarah Miller received a handwritten note in the mail. Inside was a simple message from James thanking the volunteers who had organized the memorial event and expressing appreciation for their commitment to honoring every veteran with equal respect. He made no mention of the White House, the official recognition, or the unexpected delay at the entrance. Sarah smiled as she placed the letter inside the event archive, believing it perfectly reflected the character of the man who had written it. News of the ceremony eventually reached many communities, but those who knew the full story rarely focused on titles, schedules, or distinguished guests. Instead, they remembered the retired colonel who never introduced himself with rank, the officer who chose to learn from an unexpected experience, and the professionals who worked together to improve future procedures rather than assign blame. Long after the memorial chairs had been stored away and the flags carefully folded for another year, the most meaningful part of that morning remained remarkably simple. Respect grows stronger when it is offered before recognition. Humility leaves a greater legacy than applause, and the strongest measure of honorable service is not how many people know your name, but how many lives become better because they crossed your path. Several months passed before Officer Nathan Collins and Colonel James Carter unexpectedly crossed paths again. It happened on another clear Saturday morning outside a newly opened Community Veterans Resource Center, where volunteers were welcoming former service members seeking career guidance, health resources, and family support programs. Nathan had volunteered for traffic coordination on his day off after remembering how much the previous memorial ceremony had taught him about the quiet impact of public service. As families arrived, he noticed a familiar pickup truck pulling into the parking lot. James stepped out carrying the same weathered leather folder and greeted volunteers exactly as he had greeted everyone at the memorial, with a warm smile that made every person feel equally important. When their eyes met, both men smiled naturally, as though they were continuing a conversation that had only paused rather than ended. Nathan walked over and extended his hand. "Colonel Carter, it is good to see you again." James returned the handshake with genuine warmth. "It is good to see you too, Officer Collins. Thank you for giving your Saturday to others." Nathan looked around at the growing crowd before answering. "I learned that service does not end when the uniform comes off. It simply changes its form." James nodded with quiet approval. That is a lesson many people spend a lifetime discovering. Throughout the morning, they worked side by side, without ceremony. Nathan helped elderly veterans find accessible parking spaces while James greeted families, introduced young service members to employment counselors, and quietly encouraged those struggling with the transition into civilian life. Neither man mentioned the events of the memorial ceremony unless someone else asked. When one volunteer recognized James from the White House recognition and congratulated him, he gently redirected the praise toward the dozens of volunteers preparing meals and organizing supplies. "Communities become stronger because ordinary people choose to help," he said. Recognition belongs to everyone willing to serve. Later that afternoon, a young police recruit approached Nathan with a thoughtful question. How do you know when you have enough information to make the right decision? Nathan glanced toward James before answering. You gather every fact you can. You treat every person with respect while you are gathering those facts, and you stay willing to learn something new after the facts arrive. James smiled quietly, but said nothing because he knew the lesson now belonged to Nathan rather than to himself. As the event came to an end, families departed carrying information packets. Children laughed while waving small American flags, and volunteers folded tables beneath the warm afternoon sun. Before leaving, James reached into his leather folder and removed a simple challenge coin bearing the emblem of a veterans mentorship program he had founded years earlier. He handed it to Nathan. This is not for what happened that morning, he explained. It is for what you chose to become afterward. Nathan accepted the coin with sincere gratitude, understanding that its value came not from metal, but from the trust it represented. They shook hands once more before walking toward their separate vehicles, each continuing a different path of service shaped by the same commitment to integrity. Long after the parking lot became quiet again, the story continued to travel from one community to another, not because a distinguished veteran had been recognized by important officials, and not because a police officer had performed his duty, but because two men demonstrated that humility can overcome misunderstanding, respect can survive incomplete first impressions, and character is revealed most clearly by the choices people make after the truth becomes known. Some people spend their lives trying to convince the world that they deserve respect. Others quietly live in a way that inspires respect without ever asking for it. In the end, titles may open doors, uniforms may represent responsibility, and honors may recognize achievement, but none of them can replace the lasting influence of humility, compassion, and integrity. True honor is never measured by how loudly the world speaks your name. It is measured by how faithfully you continue serving even after the applause has faded.